All eyes are on Houston right now as an explosion of a gas pipeline is causing a raging inferno. And tonight, experts say there's a different hidden threat around Texas and in at least 25 other states that's not being monitored nearly enough. We're talking about millions of abandoned oil and gas wells. They can contaminate groundwater and spew carcinogenic chemicals and harmful greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. So ABC News Investigates partnered with ABC News Live and owned stations and affiliates to conduct the largest news investigation of its kind. What potential threats do these wells pose to millions of Americans? And is enough being done to fix the problem? Tonight, Arcana Whitworth brings us Zombie Wells, the threat beneath.
From a distance, the shallow waters of Trinity Bay, just outside Houston, can appear almost pristine. But hidden in plain sight lies a threat few are even aware of.
We are headed out into Trinity Bay, and that is where they believe there is the largest concentration of these abandoned offshore wells. And the concern is that they're leaking.
More than 100 abandoned oil and gas wells have been left to rot in this bay for decades. They're considered abandoned because they haven't produced in years.
We are utterly surrounded in every direction by abandoned oil and gas wells.
Like most abandoned wells, these decaying rigs are rarely checked for leaks, which is why we've come to see if we can detect any ourselves. As we approach one well, we hear an ominous sound.
This is hissing. I can hear it.
We've brought along a handheld gas detector that experts told us could detect if a well is leaking combustible gas.
There, it's going. It's going. It's going. The second I put it over here. Typically, these aging wells, when they leak gas, it is methane. So that is a dangerous greenhouse gas.
Nearby, we find another abandoned well where there's bubbling just below the surface.
You can see this thing just bubbling everywhere. Oh, it's high, high.
This is a dark side of the fossil fuel industry. A hidden, mostly invisible threat lurking just beneath the surface of more than 25 states. There are more than 3.5 million abandoned oil and gas wells across the U.S. that we know of.
We've found that around 14 million Americans live within a mile of an abandoned well.
Those that leak are known in Texas as zombie wells.
A zombie is something that's been killed or dead and comes back to life. That's what I call a zombie well. They're coming back to life.
Leaking abandoned wells can contaminate groundwater and spew carcinogenic chemicals and harmful greenhouse gases into the atmosphere.
These wells are a threat to people and livelihoods, and especially kids and older people and people with health problems.
Yet despite the risks, experts we spoke with say not enough are inspected for leaks. Which is why ABC News, along with 6 owned and affiliated stations, set out on the largest journalistic investigation of its kind, fanning out across the nation with gas detectors to hunt down and test abandoned wells for dangerous leaks. In all, our team tested 76 wells across 5 states and found 40, more than half, were leaking oil or combustible gas at the time.
Almost immediately, and straight up to the high end. It's topped out already at 10,100.
That leak could just go on for years and years and years.
We discovered leaking wells along streams in New York and atop sunlit hills in California.
This is just full of oil.
But nowhere has more abandoned wells than Texas. More than 600,000 of them pepper the state, particularly common in the Permian Basin, where Laura Briggs built her family's dream home.
Are you hungry? It was a lifestyle choice to raise your kids rurally in the hopes that they would appreciate nature and where their food comes from and hard work and the other side of life that's not so easy.
Laura knew there were more than 30 abandoned wells on the land when she bought it, but what the mother of 4 didn't expect was that some of the wells had begun to leak, and no one was taking responsibility to clean them up.
And this one's actively leaking. It's been leaking for years.
Oh, wow, you can see, yeah, there's oil all over.
Laura says the well has been leaking for nearly a decade. Its latest operator declared bankruptcy years ago, making it what's called an orphan well. It's now left up to the state and ultimately taxpayers to plug them. Laura says she's been complaining about this one to Texas authorities for years, but nothing has been done.
So I've got a letter response from them in May that just says it'll be plugged according to priority. They have got so many out of control wells that they have to get to first.
So they're gonna wait till it's catastrophic.
Right, yes.
Texas has more than 8,000 documented orphaned wells, and oil isn't the only potentially harmful substance found leaking from them. Some also emit dangerous gases like methane, a highly combustible and potent greenhouse gas, and hydrogen sulfide, or H2S, an extremely deadly gas that these special air monitors detect.
How dangerous is the H2S gas?
If this goes off, from what I've been instructed by safety people who sell these things, you run against the wind.
We've brought along a different handheld gas detector, and while more advanced gear is required to determine the exact gas type and full scope of the leak over time, multiple experts told us the device we used can detect hundreds of combustible gases and can alert us if a well is leaking when we test it.
All right, so we're gonna go ahead and test this.
The device measures gas in parts per million and maxes out at 10,000.
I'm gonna try to test this part right here. I can see it consistently bubbling. Oh, it just went off. Wow, we're at 3,800. This is hugely concerning. I can see your house. That is where you raised your babies.
Yes. I thought the state regulated this stuff. I never thought that this would be allowed to go on.
Despite years of complaints, Laura says the state authority in charge of regulating the oil and gas industry in Texas, called the Texas Railroad Commission, or TRRC, had only plugged 3 of the 30-plus abandoned wells located on her land by the time of our visit. TRRC Commissioner Jim Wright told our Houston station, KTRK, that we do not have the money to plug all of the 8,500 orphaned wells in Texas. And so the commission has developed a very good system to prioritize plugging operations for those that leak, adding they had plugged 730 last year.
Right now, we just watch the wells and we wait for them to leak bad enough that the Railroad Commission makes them a priority and they come out and plug them.
Laura didn't have to wait long.
The well's blowing out below ground.
About a month after our visit, the well closest to her home, the same one we found leaking, suffered a major blowout and started to form an oily pool. State authorities have since plugged the well, but Laura's concerned it could happen again. A few miles away lies one of the most notorious abandoned wells in the nation.
A striking example of what happens when these wells are neglected for decades is this. It's Lake Beamer. This is a body of toxic water that has been formed by a leak that at times is spewing up to 600 gallons of water every single minute. It has proved dangerous to be around and deadly for the wildlife.
It looks pretty, but the birds come and there's H2S in this water, and eventually the gas kills them, and so this is where they come to die. You got to keep in mind is a
Rancher Skylar White has been trying to get the site cleaned up for years.
What's being done to fix this?
not a darn thing.
According to state records, the leaking well that created Lake Beamer was drilled looking for oil in 1951. But when the operators didn't find any, they converted it into a water well before abandoning it. As a result, the Texas Railroad Commission has refused to plug it, despite pleas from local landowners like Skylar. The TRRC says it's the local water district's responsibility, but the water district wants the TRRC to do it. They call the site a serious threat. Meanwhile, the well continues to leak, day after day.
It smells awful. It's that sulfur smell. It smells like rotten eggs. It's terrible. And so he put his H2S monitor down here. Oh, and it went off right away. Look at that. I mean, that's scary. It makes you want to back up. How quickly should we be leaving?
When you can't smell it anymore, that's when you're fixing to die.
To confirm the well is the source of the gas leak, we have to get up close.
All right, so just to make sure that's secure. This is also monitoring the H2S levels. Oh, there it just went. All right, so it's reading combustible gas is also spewing out.
Properly plugging an abandoned orphan well can cost millions of taxpayer dollars. And that's in part because the bonds oil and gas companies are required to post before drilling a well are rarely enough to cover the actual cost of plugging it, leaving taxpayers to pick up the rest of the bill.
The industry can and must do more to make sure that this orphan well burden doesn't fall on the public.
In 2021, Congress set aside an unprecedented $4.7 billion for plugging abandoned wells nationwide. But an ABC News data analysis of multiple sources estimates the cost of plugging most of the nation's abandoned and unplugged wells could be more than $250 billion. And current government funding will only cover plugging costs for about 6% of the nation's abandoned wells. We wanted to get the perspective of the oil and gas industry, so we reached out to the American Petroleum Institute for an interview. They declined it, but provided a statement that reads in part, "The proper sealing of oil and natural gas wells is paramount to ensure safety, sustainability, and environmental protection. And API and our member companies are committed to responsible development of our nation's energy resources from start to finish."
The current arrangement isn't working, so we need to come up with something new.
Addressing the nation's abandoned wells is no simple task. Even if there were enough money to plug them, it would take dedication at the local, state, and federal level to find a solution. And until that happens, the number of abandoned wells and the leaks they can cause is likely to continue to balloon, year after year, a growing threat for those living right beside them.
You are every day just waiting for a catastrophe.
Yeah.
This ground is dead forever. This ground will never grow anything on it.
You feel like you've been forgotten about a little bit?
Yeah, and stomped on and everything else. When it's all said and done, when I'm in the ground, you know, I want to do as good a job as I can so that my kids won't come back and say, "I wonder why Dad did this."
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's the thing that really gets you, you know.
Yeah.
Millions of people impacted by this. Our thanks to Kana and the entire I-team for this.